once again, gentle viewers, to Cult Theatre, where the RE at the end of theatre means we're classy. Today, gentle viewers, I would like to talk about showmanship. Specifically, the kind of showmanship that stood out from the rest of the cheap B-movie entertainment that won over the movie-going public of the 1950s and 60s. I'm speaking, of course, of William Castle. William Castle's films are famous, or infamous if you prefer, for his use of gimmicks. These gimmicks could range from a $10,000 freight insurance policy to the gimmick used in today's film, Percepto. These gimmicks were usually only available in the first runs of a given movie, but they proved to be quite popular, even if some of them were actually rather laughable. These gimmicks, however, could make the movie-going experience quite fun, and I rather wish someone would bring them back. Although I'm sure if somebody tried, the potential for someone with no sense of humor whatsoever to sue pants off of the producer, the film studio, the theatre chain, and anyone else you could think of would be off the charts. So all we have of those bygone days are the films themselves. But the movies are still quite fun all on their own. And thus we come to today's film, The Tingler.
The Tingler has two gimmicks, really. The aforementioned Percepto, and another one that I'll get to as we get further into the movie. Percepto may have lost his bite through the passage of time, but the other one is still quite effective. We begin the movie with a dire warning from director/producer William Castle.
I feel obligated to warn you that some of the sensations, some of the physical reactions which the actors on the screen will feel will also be experienced for the first time in motion picture history by certain members of this audience. I say certain members because, well, some people are more sensitive to these mysterious electronic impulses than others.
This is all part of Castle's showmanship, warming up the audience for the movie to come.
This is further emphasized with the arrival of three disembodied screaming heads. Incidentally, pay attention to the lady on the right, we'll be seeing her again later, which fades into one of the best terrified faces of the whole movie. As the opening credits roll, our terrified friend is led down a very institutional corridor to what will turn out to be his execution. We then get to see the star of our film, Vincent Price. Price is preparing to autopsy our frightened and now dead friend, when the man we saw standing around in the hallway earlier comes in. It turns out this fellow is the dead man's brother-in-law. He starts asking Price questions about whether or not electrocution actually works. It does now, it didn't always work when it was first introduced, which makes Price's comment about never hearing of it not working a little odd, and whether or not it hurts. The answer to that one, I'm sure, is a resounding yes.
Not if it's done properly, at least I don't think so.
Even a slight shock hurts.
Try putting an electrode soaked in saline solution on your head and another one strapped to your leg and then slamming 2,000 volts between them. If it hurts, let me know.
Grim humor is something of a staple for this movie, and I rather like it. Price finds something interesting in the dead man's vertebrae. They are severely broken, and not from having several thousand volts going through him. It seems as if they were subject to some incredibly strong force. The brother-in-law muses that this could have had something to do with the fear the man felt, and we get our first title drop.
Now I think I'll call it the Tingler.
The brother-in-law asks for a ride into town from Price, and we finally get the brother-in-law's name, Ollie Higgins. When we arrive in town, we find that Ollie runs a movie theater that specializes in silent films with his wife. Ollie and Price head up to Ollie's apartment for some coffee, and we meet Ollie's wife, Martha. Martha is deaf and cannot speak. In fact, she doesn't seem to be able to utter any sound at all. Not only that, she's a bit neurotic on top of everything, and also has a severe blood phobia. Price cuts his hand after dropping a saucer in the sink, and Martha freezes up and then seems to faint. Price says it isn't a faint, though. He calls it a psychosomatic escape, which sounds like a faint to me, but Again, I'm not a doctor. Martha comes to and runs right to the big safe full of money to make sure it's still there. I bring this up because it becomes important later. At any rate, Price leaves Ollie and Martha to open up the theatre and goes home. Price arrives home and meets his sister-in-law, Lucy. Lucy is dating Price's assistant, Dave, and Lucy and Price's wife, Isabel, seem to have a difference of opinion where Dave is concerned.
I'm too young, David's too poor, and if I do anything she doesn't approve of, she won't give me my share of the money.
At this point you might be saying to yourself, this plot thread must be going somewhere, what with all the time they've been spending on it. Sadly, gentle viewers, you will be wrong about that.
Dave arrives with 2 items in tow. One is a big black cat that Price and Dave intend to use for experimental purposes, and the other is a new kind of drug. Or more precisely, a new kind of acid, if you will. But more on that later. Right now, it's pointless, soapy side plot time. Seems Isabel has been running around being the exact opposite of a proper 50s housewife. Coming home at all hours, kissing strange men outside her house. Price is a bit annoyed, partially because Isabel and Price seem to have a mutual loathing for one another, and partially because of the Lucy and Dave situation. At any rate, the threats, insults, and sick burns fly back and forth until Price pulls a gun on Isabel. Price takes Isabel to the lab in the house, and after thoroughly terrifying the woman, he appears to straight up shoot the lady. And then he takes some x-rays of her spine. Turns out he didn't really shoot her, he used a blank. Also, scientific ethics and common sense are for other people. Price wakes her up and thanks her for her participation in his experiments. Like I said, there's some dark humor in this movie. The next day, Price shows Dave what he found when he developed those x-rays that he took.
The Tingler.
Here's where we get to see the Tingler itself for the first time. We also get some exposition on how the thing operates. The Tingler feeds on fear, and it will keep feeding unless its victim releases their fear tensions, which is a very silly way to put it, by screaming. It then either dissipates or dies. That part isn't made very clear. Later, Price has been trying to scare himself in order to experience the Tingler's effects firsthand. He's been unsuccessful so far.
Who's up for subjecting him to a combination of political ads and congressional debates? No, that's no good. We want him scared, not depressed.
So he hits upon the idea of trying out that acid that we saw earlier. This particular acid is called lysergic acid dithylamide, better known as LSD. What ensues is the first ever depiction of a trip on film.
The walls. The walls.
Fun fact! Movie sets are an excellent source of vitamins B, C, D, E, and fiber.
This astounding breach of scientific procedure, not to mention a profound lack of common sense, results in nothing, really, except a red herring, but we'll get to that later. Price goes back to the theatre to check up on Mrs. Higgins. It seems she's not doing too well. She hasn't been eating well or sleeping. Price gives her a once-over and gives her a shot to relax her, and gives Ollie a prescription for some sleeping pills. Ollie asks if he has some time to get a beer at the local bar, and Price says sure. After all, she'll be out for a while. Back upstairs, Martha isn't having the rest of the doctor ordered for her. There's strange figures coming after her with machetes, axes flying at her, and the most effective sequence in the whole movie. I mentioned earlier that this movie has 2 gimmicks, one of which we have yet to see, but the other one is right here. The rest of the movie is in black and white, except for this scene with Martha in the bathroom, when we get the glorious addition of blood red to the color palette. It's a marvelous scene with the blood in the sink and the hand rising out of the blood-filled bathtub and the half-awful, half-brilliant death certificate. Judith Evelyn, who plays Martha, does a wonderful job on this scene. Really, this scene makes the whole movie for me. It's just so well done and effective. This scene is why I love this movie. Price returns home to find that his wife has been entertaining guests. But before the usual threats and insults can get started, Ollie interrupts things by arriving with his possibly dead wife. Ollie and Price take her into the lab, and Price declares her dead and starts asking Ollie about the circumstances. Before they can get too far, Martha sits up for a bit before lying down again. Price does an autopsy, and we finally get to see the Tingler in the flesh, as it were. But before Price can get the thing in a cage, it lashes onto him, causing him to scream. This brings Isabel in, and she gets an awful idea.
The Grinch got a wonderful, awful idea.
But for the moment, they need to figure out what to do with Martha's mortal remains. Price suggests calling a funeral parlor and the police, and Ollie dutifully promises to do exactly that in the morning. After Ollie leaves, Isabel and Price celebrate Price's once-in-a-lifetime find with a little drink. A drink that Isabel spiked with something to help her dear husband sleep after he's completed his work. Isabel's plan gets a slight interruption from Ollie, who calls to say that everything's fine now, we're all fine here, how are you? And when Isabel hangs up for her passed-out husband, Ollie takes the opportunity to tidy up a little. You know, putting away the mask and props he used to frighten his wife to death. That sort of thing. Back at the happy home of our leading man, Isabel leaves the room to get the Tingler from the lab and sets it loose in the living room where Price is out cold. Unfortunately for Isabel, Lucy comes home just as the Tingler has gotten a hold of Price's neck. She hears a strange noise coming from the living room and goes to investigate. She finds Price with the Tingler busy choking him and screams, which makes the Tingler let go.
And here's where I have a bit of a problem. It's been established that the Tingler feeds on fear, and the scream of its victim will cause it to dissipate. So how does someone else's scream do the trick? Is it just the high frequency of the scream itself? Because they don't explain this at all. I know, it's just a movie, I should really just relax. But it's plot holes like these that get people angry.
At any rate, the next day finds Price has not only grown a conscience all of a sudden, but he's developed some ethics too. He's decided that the Tingler is far too dangerous for science to deal with, and he's going to put it back where it belongs, right along the spine of Martha Higgins. Funny thing though, it seems Ollie never reported Martha's death, despite having called Price the previous night to tell him that he did. Price heads to Ollie's apartment with the Tingler in tow and finds Ollie busy trying to get away. Price confronts Ollie about Martha's death, and Ollie confesses that he killed her.
You don't know how it was with her, Doc. She would have killed me if she could have. She tried to lots of times.
Oh yes, I'm sure, Ollie. I'm sure that your blood-phobic and possibly OCD wife would have bashed you over the head at any moment, despite us never having seen her show any animosity towards you, except for nagging you a bit about things getting done on time. Personally, I think the money had more to do with it than anything that Martha did.
But anyway, they go to fetch the Tingler to put it back in Martha's corpse, but the Tingler seems to have had other plans, because it's escaped and gone into the theatre below the apartment. Price and Ollie hurry over to the theatre. Incidentally, the movie that the theatre is showing is a real silent film. It's called Total David, and it's from 1921. Go look it up on IMDb if you don't believe me. But getting back to the Tingler. The Tingler is inside the auditorium of the theatre and gets a hold of a young lady's leg. And that young lady just happens to be the lady on the right at the beginning of the movie. Told you we'd be seeing her again. At any rate, the screen goes black for a moment, and Price helpfully informs the audience that everything is just fine. Now, this is all part of the Percepto gimmick, a little warm-up for the main event that's about to come. The movie comes back, and the Tingler has managed to get up into the projection booth and stops the projector. The whole movie stops, and now I get to talk about Percepto.
All Percepto really was a vibrating mechanism under certain seats in the theatre where the movie was showing. At the appropriate time, the vibrators would go off and planted audience members would start screaming, when on the film, Price would tell the audience to start screaming for their lives. It's a fun little gimmick, even if it doesn't translate as well without the vibrating seats.
After the audience has successfully defeated the Tingler by screaming their heads off, Price and Ollie head up to the projection booth where the Tingler has gotten a hold of the projectionist. But the projectionist screams just in time and the Tingler lets go. Price puts the Tingler in a film case and he and Ollie head back to Ollie's apartment. After Price has reinstalled the Tingler, he tells Ollie that he's going to the police to tell them that Ollie killed his wife. Ollie tries to pull a gun on Price, but Price just walks away to call the police from the box office downstairs. And Ollie doesn't do a damn thing to stop him. Doesn't even try. Oh well. After Price is gone, Ollie gets a little surprise. Martha gets up. And we end where we started, on a man's terrified face and yet another dire warning.
Ladies and gentlemen, just a word of warning. If any of you are not convinced that you have a Tingler of your own, the next time you're frightened in the dark, don't scream.
And there you have it, gentle viewers, The Tingler.
Despite its slow start and one of the subplots going absolutely nowhere, this is actually quite a fun little movie. And if you're in the right frame of mind, this can be an enjoyable ride through some cinematic history. I can highly recommend watching this one with some friends and some beer.
It may not be up to modern horror standards, but it does have some memorable scenes and is well worth seeking out. Next time, we'll have the second Vincent Price movie that we'll be taking a look at, and in my opinion, it could qualify as a slasher film, or at least a proto-version of that particular subgenre. Why do I have the feeling that somebody's going to give me quite a bit of grief over that last statement?
For the touch of your lips, dear, but much more for the touch of your whips, dear. You can raise welts like nobody else as we dance to the masochism tango.
Exactly.